And we're live! Yay! Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on our last panel for the Black Book Summit. We are so excited to talk about Afro SFF today. We have the amazing Brittany, who will be moderating our panel. And just so you know, we are going to also be taking questions in the chat throughout. So whatever questions you have, make sure you have them ready. And Brittany, take it away.
As usual, welcome everybody to Black Prose. Here at Black Prose, we are blackity black, black, black. So if that makes you uncomfortable, go ahead and hit that backity back, back, back button. But like Oshley was saying, today we are here to talk about my favorite topic in the reading world, and it is Afro SFF. It is the place that I live, the place that I breathe, and the place that I thrive. And we are here with some people who also kind of share the same sentiments. So I'm going to let everybody introduce yourselves. We're going to start with Ben, and we'll just work our way around. But I want you to just basically introduce yourself, tell us about your channel, and that'll be like the first question, because I have questions that we're going to deep dive into today.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben from Benreadsbooks, and my channel is a little bit kind of all over the place at the moment, but you'll have to forgive me for that. I primarily do talk about sci-fi and fantasy, but of course, recently I've been branching out into more stuff about pop culture and everything. So we're just seeing how it goes. But that's primarily the crux of my channel, and I'm so glad to be here and joined by amazing Black creators, and just to talk about my favorite subject as well, Afro SFF. I'm very excited, so thank you for tuning in.
Okay, Chloe, you're next.
Hello, I'm Chloe from Thistle Verse. I've been on BookTube for a little under 2 years now. I think my 2-year BookTube birthday is coming up soon, so it's wild. It doesn't feel like 2 years. And to be fair, I haven't been super consistent the first year, so it might be crunched a little more, but I've been here for a little bit now. It's like weird to think about. I mostly review science fiction and fantasy by Black authors. I am kind of dabbling in like horror with supernatural elements. I might look at some contemporaries and stuff, but that is most of what I read. Stuff that like doesn't really exist in our world as we know it. I think that's everything.
Okay, Njeri.
Hi everyone, I'm Njeri. My channel is OnyxPages, started in 2017. My channel is a niche channel, so I focus exclusively on science fiction and fantasy by Black writers, with an interest in Afrofuturism, African futurism, and also queer authors. So that's what I talk about, and I will just pass it on.
Thank you, Sherri.
Hey everybody, so I'm Sherri. I'm over at Obsidian Text and Tangents. I started my BookTube channel in July of 2020, so very new. And I mostly go on random tangents in the middle of me trying to give a concise review about books that I read, just to go off topic. My BookTube channel is basically me fangirling over Octavia Butler and N.K. Jemisin and Nydia Corafor. No matter what I'm reading, somehow they come up. And yeah, so that's what my channel is about, and check it out.
Okay, and last but not least, Neeks.
My name is Neeks. My channel is Neeks, and I literally, I would say I 90% only read Black and brown authored fantasy. So it's my heart, what brings me joy, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Awesome. Okay, so now that you know that we are all fantasy readers, here's the question that I'm going to start with. You can choose however you want to go with this. Do not think too hard about this. What is the first Black sci-fi or fantasy book you ever remember reading? And do you remember how it made you feel? I love how everybody's face was like, Chloe, you can go ahead.
This might not be accurate, but like this is the first one that pops into my head. I think it was A Taste of Honey by Kai Shanti Wilson, because I had like just joined Solar Powered. I think that was like the first, just the book club that Njeri created. And that was like, I think the first book that I had read. It's a novella. It is about this Black gay man in this fantasy world. It's very homophobic, and he has like developed feelings for like this soldier who's like kind of stopping by in this port city, and it's about like basically their relationship and the things that could be and the things that are. And I'll leave it there. It is a really great book, and I just really loved it. I just loved the writing. It was such a lush world. It was so exciting to have like a Black queer character in a fantasy book. And it just like was so different from anything I'd read at that point. Like I had been reading a lot of like Europe-based fantasies, like young adult, and like this was an adult novella, and it just felt like this whole world just like went like boom, like all these possibilities opened up. And yeah, that was.
And Njeri?
I can go next. So first, let's define terms. So like,
yes,
it's okay. It's a question that was in the chat too. So so you asked about Black sci-fi fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I use the term, what I mean is two things. One, the author is Black African descended. That's one. And then the characters and the setting are decidedly like on purpose, i.e. not metaphorically, not indirectly, not hopefully, but like actually fully clearly Black. So that's what I'm talking about when I say Black science fiction and fantasy. And then the first one that I remember would be Brown Girl in the Ring by Nalo Hopkinson, my favorite author. Read it for the first time decades ago, and it made me feel seen. It made me feel seen because there were casually queer characters in the story, and also it was set in Toronto, which is rare for science fiction and fantasy. So to see places that I like can go to right now, pointing like, like outside, see those places like have monsters and goblins and gods. The CN Tower in that story like is a magical beacon, right? So it made me feel seen, the characters from the Caribbean. And so that's how I felt when I saw it, compared to my favorite childhood fantasy movies like Neverending Story, in which I don't think there were any Black characters. So like it was just amazing to be in the story, and then not only in the story, but to have plot arcs that were relevant to me and recognizable for my own life.
Yeah, I haven't read that book yet, but I'm reading it because of Njeri. I should just like point that out, that it's on my list because of Njeri. But who wants to go next? I'm just letting you volunteer. Go ahead, Ben.
I think for me, when I think about it, I actually started a lot later than most. Like I spent a lot of time like doing work and stuff, so I've only really gotten back into reading the last 2 years, to be completely honest. When I did my master's in creative writing a while back, I realized that the list was undecidedly, unabashedly like white. So it was a weird thing going through. And then one day I went to Waterstones, and just out of the blue, I actually saw Rosewater by Tade Thompson, and like I just don't know how to describe it. It's just when you see something that talks about aliens in Nigeria, I'm just like, this sounds so cool. So I picked it up, and then it just kind of took off from there. So that was actually quite recent, like 2019-ish. So really, really recent for me. And it was just something new because especially like in England where I'm situated, they really focus on English science fiction and English fantasy, and sometimes if they're being real adventurous they'll go to Wales and talk about like Welsh mythology then. But like to see something that was happening not just in modern Nigeria, but futuristic Nigeria, it just kind of blew the doors wide open for me. So I think that was my first real instance of like of Black African fiction, like science fiction, and it was just honestly, it's such a drug. I just can't go back to like the many retellings of King Arthur that are around. So that's all I'm gonna say before I start going off tangent.
Okay. Sherri, you want to go next?
I sure can. Okay, so first of all, similar to Ben, I've later in life started reading a lot more again. Like I read for pleasure a lot in middle school, and that was all like street lit because that was like where the Black people were in the library. And it was like, I relate to this. This is like my neighborhood I grew up in. And then, you know, school, high school, college, all that jazz. So that's what I was reading. In my free time, I was like, I'm going to watch something and not read anything. But in 2014 or 13, I remember specifically, I'd seen this book in the bookstore and I was like, oh, interesting cover. Black lady on the front. I'll take that, please. Author didn't know who she was. Started reading it and I was like, oh, this is intense. Oh, this is really intense. This is making my stomach hurt, but it's so good. I just need to keep going. I'm just going to give myself like 10-minute breaks. And I keep reading again. Like I was like so anxious for the characters that I was like physically my stomach hurt. But it was so good that I couldn't stop reading it. And that is when I read Kindred and got introduced to Octavia Butler. And I was like, this is gonna be my new favorite thing. And for a while, that was the only Octavia Butler book that I'd read. But I was like, this is my favorite author. I don't even need like everything. I don't need to read more. I already know this book is excellent. So that's the first one that I specifically like vividly remember reading and like introduction into Afro science fiction and fantasy.
Okay. I didn't know where you were going with that. And I was like, I need to know the book. And then you said, I'm like, yeah. Okay. Neeks, what's your book?
Just like with Ben, I had to start later in life because like there aren't a lot of opportunities for to find Black authors in an Italian library in the 90s. So it was a late start for me, but they had Black characters in their books. I don't remember much about that though because it was also in Italian and I don't speak that language. So there is I don't know. I think my first time was like probably after high school. And I don't remember that book. The earliest book I can remember reading is Kindred by Octavia Butler. I think that's kind of the entry point for a lot of us, as she is so prolific and just like, I think that her legacy is making sure that we know the joy of fantasy. So, yay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've mentioned some books. Obviously, the most ironic part is Kindred is a common factor. I think, can we successfully say that everybody has kind of read Kindred already or it's on the list to read?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to have a moment. When I first read Kindred, I was like Sherri. It made me very uncomfortable. I felt this need to want to skip to the end of the book to make sure that certain characters were okay because of the way that the books were written. And I was just like, I can't breathe unless I know that these people are okay. And then also I felt this need where I was like, I'm so happy that that this is a book of just Black people. Like, and then it's Black people kind of, not all Black people, but you know what I mean? It's like, I saw Black people and I needed more Black people. And so even though I felt like I sweated when I read Kindred for the first time, like I felt like actual, like a physical emotion to Kindred, after I read that book, I deep dived, but I too did not go back to Octavia Butler. Like I actually went more straight fantasy instead of sci-fi, which brings me into, what do you feel is your separation between sci-fi and fantasy? Because I am a fantasy reader who can surface level sci-fi. Whereas I know some people on here, they can deep dive into sci-fi like it is nothing. And me, I will be like, I'm drowning. I got to come back up. We've done things here that I can't do this. And I have to come back up. So do you consider, like, because I know some people don't consider Afro sci-fi is one topic, Afro fantasy is another topic. And those are two different genres. We combine them a lot when we have conversations, but they are actually two different genres. So I guess my question is, which one do you dabble in more?
I have a question.
Neeks.
Oh, well, I always thought the separation was, where is the magic coming from? So if it's coming from like science, that's sci-fi. If it's coming from the ether, that's fantasy. I thought that was the separation.
I've actually never thought about that.
That's how my brain thought of it. But I do fantasy more because I think sci-fi can get a little crazy. Like I'm a huge fan of things like Firefly, and Eureka was like my shit when I was growing up. But I think fantasy is like where it's at. That's where I live. That's where I eat.
Okay. Anybody else? Because now I kind of think like, what would be what do you think the separation is?
I can go.
Okay, Chloe.
For me, I think the separation is honestly very nebulous. Because I think there's like this idea of like, oh, it's very technical, it's hard sci-fi, right? But like think of like Octavia Butler's Patternist series, right? I don't know if anyone considers that sci-fi. It's about fantasy. It's about mutants with telepathic abilities. Like there's kind of like, it's not really like a whole technical thing on like, oh, this is how the genes work and like this is all the, science behind what they're doing, but like mutants and telepathy are kind of like considered a sci-fi trope, and so we kind of classify it as sci-fi. It's
just
a little more wishy-washy, and I'm not too hung up on the difference. Like it's something I'm realizing more about how I read, that like something I think about more. I think I'm really drawn to books that are playing with genre a lot and like combine them in weird ways, or like really push the bounds of what is considered a certain genre. And so it's something that I think is an important conversation. It's also something that I don't know if it affects my reading as much like right now.
And Njeri, you're muted.
I want to blow up the binary because those definitions are not ours. So in terms of science, and I totally agree with Neeks, when I was introduced to science fiction and fantasy, that was the defining question, right? Where is this? What's the source of the magic? If it's science fiction. Well, I don't need to repeat it. Neeks said it perfectly.
Yes.
But that's not our language. Those are not our binaries. And when you look at and read about like Afrofuturisms or African futurisms, especially more African futurisms, what we hear is that if the continent of Africa is your source and ancient cosmologies are your source, then this separation of technology and like fantasy and the spiritual, that actually isn't part of our lineage, right? Our lineage is one where all of these things combine and connect. So that's why it's hard to define something like Binti by Nnedi Okorafor as strictly science fiction, because the math, this was a science, was the spirituality, was the culture. And so it's very difficult to separate and really problematic sometimes to separate these pieces of work into these categories that are not made for us. And then when you think about the impact on publishing and what categorizations of stories sell more, they don't serve us. They don't serve our writers.
The
people who talk about that are like Dr. Karen Lord, for example, Nalo Hopkinson. They all talk about these categorization. So yes, that's not to say that science fiction isn't a thing. It is, is if the source is science fiction, they are different. But I think it's important, especially like as Black folks, and when we're having a conversation of Black folks, to remember that we don't need to be caught up with those separations. We can be, but we don't have to be, and maybe we shouldn't be.
Maybe we shouldn't. I mean, you bring up a very good point, because I do have to remember that this entire genre in itself was created way after definitions were made. And they had to eventually give us our own space because our space was so unique and so different. So I do appreciate you for bringing that up, because that brings me to the next question. So thanks to Njeri, I learned about a specific genre of fantasy and sci-fi known as speculative. And this is where I kind of want to spend a little time, because I went online because I thought maybe I needed to get some specific definitions. Maybe I needed to get, like as N.K. Jemisin kindly makes an appearance on Neeks' screen. Yes, I want to dive into this world about the different definitions, because one thing that I did notice is that there is African futurism, and that's funny. Miss WOC Reader actually brought this up. There is a different there's a talk about the difference between African futurism and Afrofuturism. But my question is this based, again, this is another question where I'm asking, like, is this an actual separation? Is there a difference? Or is this just a preference upon the authors? Because I've seen Nettie specifically specify what she writes. And she said that she writes Afrofuturism. Wait, no, she said she writes, thank you. She writes African futurism, not Afrofuturism. And so I've read a couple of her books. So I'm always just like, okay, well, what is the difference that I should be looking for when I'm looking for African futurism versus Afrofuturism? Is it specifically because it's in Africa? And then does Afro cover the rest of the diaspora? This is the questions that I'm posing to you guys, just so that you can tell me what you think, because this is what I've been thinking about a lot in our categories.
I thought it was diasporic this whole time, but now I'm not sure.
Well, I know that there has been a distinction, because it's not always, like, the fantasy books are not always set in Africa. So I assume that when this separation, African futurism, meant that the setting was in Africa with Africans. That was my assumption. But I am not the expert, and I would like to know the thoughts.
Well, is it just like, because you can, just like speaking from my limited scope, right? You can be in America but still be African, but you can be in America and be Black. So the Afro-American part. So I thought it was just like what the author decided to do with the book. I don't think it necessarily means they're in Africa. I thought it just meant African.
So
no, you can go ahead, Njeri.
I'm just reading. So African futurism is a subcategory of science fiction that's similar to Afrofuturism, but more deeply rooted in African culture, history, mythology, and point of view, as it then branches into the Black diaspora. And it does not privilege or center the West. So there is a difficult moment in Afrofuturism where Western Afrofuturists rejected the notion that the source of Afrofuturism should be Africa. And there was tension around that. And I don't know enough about this debate to know if the definition of African futurism like evolved out of that. But I know that Dr. Okorafor has been very, very clear that she writes African futurism, and that the source of African futurism is Africa and African ways of being and so on. There are people who believe that Afrofuturism, that Africa is the source of Afrofuturism as well. But Afrofuturism is a term that was coined by a white man in the 90s that has been used in a Western context, and that has actually in some iterations been really problematic in its relationship to Africa as a continent and as a technological, like innovative source of scientific innovation as well, right? So I do think there's a difference. Yeah, I do think there's an important difference.
Yeah, the comments are lit up too.
And then one thing I wanted to add is like, so Nettie has a blog post about this on her website when she specifically goes into much of what Njeri has just said. But I want to share how she starts the blog post off. So she starts it off and she's saying that she started using the term African futurism, a term that she coined. So let's all give her cred right now, because she felt that one, the term Afrofuturism had several definitions, and some of the most prominent ones didn't describe what she was writing and what she was doing. Two, she was being called an Afrofuturist, whether she agreed or not, no matter how much she publicly resisted it. Like, people were labeling her, right? She wasn't able to label herself. And then three, she needed to regain control of how she was being defined. So much to what Njeri is saying, there's definitely a distinction that is to be made and acknowledged when separating those terms. And then the rest of it, Njeri already said, so I won't get into.
Yeah. Ben, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Njeri, because for me, I'm still very, very new into the African futurism genre as a whole. But I completely agree, because like in my own personal experience, limited experience, the stuff that the books that I've read before and afterwards, I can definitely see the Western lens and focus of the Afrofuturism. But when I read a book that is African futurism, or you can just tell, it sounds really just like vague to say, but I definitely feel like the setting, the culture, especially just like the history behind like lots of the characters and everything, you can just tell that it feels, personally to me, it feels like there is a distinction between the two. I do feel like the setting, the setting, and also I would even go to the extent of saying, talking about the plot and everything that happens within the two genres, feel really, really different between the two. So I'd fully agree that I feel personally that there needs to be a slight distinction between the two, because otherwise, to have such a huge category of books with different cultures and everything just be under the term Afrofuturism doesn't sit right with me personally. I think it's just it kind of, when you have that type of thing, it's kind of like the one size fits all thing, which is never the case. There's always going to be a different story that doesn't necessarily fit the formula of the Afrofuturism thing. So that's where I'm at personally.
Okay.
And then can I say one more thing? Oh, wait, Neeks, did you start?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the example that Noria gave is like the easiest way to explain it. Because the more she listed off Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, which, as we all know, Tomi is a she Nigerian American. I know that she's American. She's primarily grew up here, and a lot of people have spoken about how her Yoruba is not African in origin; it's Brazilian, and I think that that's like a good way to explain that she's writing Afrofuturism, because it is loosely based in traditional things, and then you have books like, I think Rosewater, Ben said earlier, and there's a bunch in the chat that I can't see anymore. But yeah, I think like that's the best way to explain it for someone who, like me, has a limited scope of what that means. So yeah.
Okay, Sherri?
The only other thing I wanted to add is that I think it's important to remember that we're inherently, by using these terms and these genres, we're labeling people's work and then often labeling these authors as well. So when someone does like go out of their way to specifically be like, hey, yo, no, that's not a title or a label I want applied to my work or myself. Especially I'm a Black woman, don't use nothing else, okay, than what is being stated to how to address them in their work. That's all I want to say.
Also, there's also a really interesting debate about whether Afrofuturism is a genre, and it's not, right? Like it's science fiction, fantasy; those things are genres. And there's a really good article written by Nalo Hopkinson and responding to a blog by Nnedi Okorafor for talking about how Afrofuturism is not it's not a genre of literature. Like there are works of science fiction, works of fantasy, works of speculative fiction, works of nonfiction that might adopt like Afrofuturism as an orientation or African futurism as an orientation, but they're not genres, and that's a really interesting thing to learn about and read about as well.
Yeah, I didn't even know that one exists. We're gonna have to find that link and put it in the description box after this because I'm intrigued. I've personally never considered Afrofuturism or African futurism as its specific genre, but it is a phrase that I use a lot when I'm describing books to people or trying to encourage people to read what I read so I have other people to discuss it with. And I'm always trying to like give them some kind of incentive. I'm like, oh no, it's Afrofuturistic because of this, that, and the third, where it's like, Afrofuturism is not actually the genre. That is just an aspect of the book.
So I've not read this article that Njeri mentioned. Can't wait for that link because I'm very interested in it. But either way, I think that you're not potentially you're not mislabeling it because it's still a lens, a perspective in which the story is being told, right? So it is. The label may not be wrong, just how we're like the category that we're giving that label might be. Instead of calling it a genre, it's more a perspective, a lens, a frame of how this story is being told.
The audience is asking for some books that we would describe as Afrofuturism. And someone said, could Afrofuturism be considered a subgenre of sci-fi? I'm not going to say subgenre because, again, we're getting too hung up on the titles. It's just it's a good way to describe the book. Like, it's one of the ways you're going to describe the book. So without going too deep into like all the definitions, like we enjoy this area because there's so many different topics and things that are addressed in this category of our reading. We get aliens, we get magic, we get somebody going in the past, somebody messing up something in the future. We get everything that we've seen on TV and everything that we've read as children. We get that, but Black. So it's like, I said all of this to say, we don't really need, who cares about the genre? It's Black and we're reading it. And not only is it Black, but it's intersectionally Black. And it's giving us something that like all of us in general as people need to work on. And it's giving it's giving it to us in a way that can also invoke some imagination and just bring a different type of joy to like regular everyday things, because it's something about reading a book about a girl walking down the street versus a girl walking down the street and she's abducted by some random alien that's actually been floating around in the clouds for like the whole time. Same story, but like now we get aliens, you know what I mean? So here's my question for you guys. What is something, when you guys pick up books in this category, what is something that you look for in these books? So like, you're like, this is what I consider to be great when I read books that have this in it. Oh.
So this is actually really funny. For me, I'm actually gonna talk about Binti here. I've got a really funny story about that. So yes, beautiful cover. Very jealous that I couldn't get that
I
from the
need to
UK.
get that
But
cover.
a friend of mine in the States sent that over to me, and it's my favorite. But I digress. I think for me, especially when I looked at Binti, it first came out in the UK, completely different cover, but of course it had a black face on it. I was just like, yes, what's going on here? And I remember because I was doing some errand or something with my mom, and I just didn't have the time to just pick it up and buy it. So I was like, oh, let me just quickly read about the back and let's see what happens. And it was just talking about how Binti wanted to get into one of the best schools, and I was just like, okay, this is interesting. It just like the personal motivations were just loud and clear. And because in Waterstones it was in the sci-fi section, it's like, all right, this is interesting, I'll come back later. And then I just never did. But then when one of my subscribers actually DM'd me about it and was just like, oh, we should read this, and then I checked there again, it was perfect. It was just, for me, when I look at the back cover, as long as the personal motivations are clear and just like it, for me, it's kind of like instead of having something happen to the character, you have the character wanting something and it's clear at the back. And then for me, that's what sealed the deal for me. I think that's something that really just gets me going, just gets me excited for reading a book or picking it up. I know that sounds super vague, but it genuinely, like, I've had a lot of books that kind of had the setting or something around them happen instead of having the character wanting to do something. But that's primarily the thing that really sets some books apart for me.
Okay. Anyone else?
I just want to answer the question that you just posed.
Oh, so, yeah. I forgot about that.
Binti series has 3 books. Except for it doesn't. There is a 4th little mini novella in there that I didn't know about until later.
But it's only if you buy if you buy the book that comes with the trilogy,
yeah,
as one book, you'll get the 4th book.
Yes, it's in there. Like it says complete trilogy, and then it says with a brand new Binti story, and that's the little mini story that I read them separately when I first read them, and so I didn't know the 4th story existed, and it happens in between 2 of the other ones, and so I was like pretty salty. So I just wanted to let that person know who asked that question.
Yeah, it's technically 3 with a bonus. So when you, I think it's, I don't know, can you buy the mini one separately, or does it only come with the 3rd one? It only comes with the book that comes with all 3 of the stories in it. Yeah, you get the bonus novella to make it the 4 stories from the 3 one. Anyone else want to answer my question? Sherri, you can go. You can keep going if you want to.
Sorry. So I'm just gonna answer real quick because I feel like I talked a lot just by talking about that little mini story. But a lot of things factor into having a book be like amazing for me. And 2 of the big ones though are world building. Like if I'm reading this book, right? Because mostly I'm not reading contemporary. So you need to build the world. And if you're not doing a good job at that, you need to build the world in the like magic system or the technology around it. And if that's not done well, then there's no way that the book is getting more than 3 stars. So it's like just like it's impossible. Like that's what I'm here for. Build it out for me. Paint me a picture so I can imagine it in my brain. And then 2, the characters need to be really strong characters. And I use the word strong characters because I don't have to like them necessarily. Like I do not like. We're in the middle of reading the Patterns series for OEB, and let me tell you about not liking characters. I don't like them on a personal level, but they are good. Like, this very compelling, complete characterizations, right? They feel like people in my brain. Not great people, by the way. I want to slap a couple people, but they feel like people. So those are two of like my like big things when I'm reading a story.
Okay, who wants to go next?
Was the question what draws us to a book?
Yeah, like what when you're picking up a book in these genres, like what are the things that are like this makes a great book?
Well, I think we've talked about it a little bit before, like we started, like what initially what like makes us buy the book, and for me, it's literally like, oh, is this book by a Black person? Awesome. So I typically will buy it. That's not, I don't have the money to buy all of them, but usually, like, if I see a book and it's like, this character goes on a journey, or this character learns, they come from a long lineage of magical people who now have to save the world. Like, I like stuff like that. I love seeing characters go on like an epic quest. I love stuff like that. Like a major or minor romance line is always good. I think I just really like magic. Like, it doesn't even have to be a hard magic system.
I mean, that's
like,
fair. If magic is what gets you, magic is it. Yeah, that works.
It's cool. It's fun.
Okay, Chloe, what drives you to your books?
I really like stories where it's clear that the author really like loves and appreciates like oral like storytelling. Like, there's a lot of like detail and like how it's like written. Like, I don't have my bookcase here because the lighting's terrible in my room, so I brought some of the books up here. I was like shuffling through them. I remember like, oh, like Redemption.
Times. If y'all don't have notebooks out, I forgot to say that. If y'all don't have notebooks out to take recs, you probably should now, because we're gonna start just dropping books at some point. So get your pens out. I'm gonna try to type them, but yeah, you can go now, Chloe.
Like Redemption and Indigo by Karen Lord, just like how the story is structured, like it's being told to you, how like the sentences are set up. It feels like someone talking to you, and I really like that aspect in books. I really like books that incorporate like folktale or like stories of like divinity and like lore and stuff like that. And I also really like stories where characters have a connection with nature, whether that's like they're really good with plants or they're really good with animals, or they're like you could throw them in the woods somewhere and they'd like be able to survive like for months on their own. Like, I don't know why, but I really do like those types of stories.
Yeah, I like those too. Njeri?
So I'm trying to keep it together because I want to tell you so many things.
We've got time. Go ahead.
So, first of all, Black mermaids. Give me stories underwater. Give me stories of people who can breathe underwater. Give me stories of people whose bodies morph underwater. That is like what I need. I want water. I want underwater. Why do I want water? Because for me, the Middle Passage and what happened to African people, what happened to my ancestors across the Middle Passage is like a place of ancestral trauma. So any magic that you can put in that place, being powerful, transformative healing that can emerge from that space, I'm there. So the Deep, Rivers Solomon, the Jumbies, Tracy Baptiste. So even though Moom, the short story written by Dr. Okorafor, which is the prologue to Lagoon, isn't a mermaid story, it is an underwater story that has like a kind of climate fiction, climate justice fiction element to it as well. So that was pretty powerful. So Lagoon by Dr. Nnedi Okorafor. So any books that have to do with water people. Oh, my favorite book by Nalo Hopkinson is the New Moon's Arms, which is a beautiful water people story. So that's like one thing that I look for. The other thing that draws me to a story is well-defined world-building systems that include a high degree of politics, law, educational structures, policy structures. So we're talking the parables by Octavia E. Butler. The book that I just read has that Gutter Child by J.L. Richardson. Anything by N.K. Jemisin, master world builder. Definitely the Inheritance trilogy in terms of like Gods and Politics, and Broken Earth trilogy for like climate stuff. If you're attracted to like climate law and that as well. So like, and then the other thing, if I don't have those, the other thing that I'm really attracted to is stories that talk about that involve magic, fantasy, or some kind of like scientific intervention into injustice, right? So like social justice, speculative fiction. So a short story collection that's good for that is Octavia's Brood, which was inspired by the work of Octavia Butler. There's also, help me, Patrice Caldwell's short story, A Phoenix Still Must
Phoenix
Burn.
First Must Burn.
First Must Burn. Also, Book of Phoenix by Dr. Okorafor is an interesting, like, just like talks about justice. Anything by Nalo Hopkinson, but particularly Midnight Robber, and Brown Girl in the Ring. And one of her books that's lesser known, but I think is really interesting if you're into YA, is The Chaos, which a lot of people don't talk about. It is a chaotic read, but I think it's like a really fascinating one as well. Another one that's really okay. I will stop soon, but
Keep
one
going.
that's really cool is Elysium by Jennifer Marie Brissett, which is really cool. And then the last thing before I stop is stories that have like strong historical backgrounds. So Kindred being one of them, Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates being another example, Everfair by Nisi Shawl, most of the writing by Andrea Hairston, which is really strong in Redwood and Wildfire being really strong in terms of history. And also She Would Be King by Wayetu Moore, which is like a retelling of the establishment of Liberia. And Unkindness of Ghosts. So strong political system, also outer space, also queer characters, also like mother-child like strange dynamic. So I think those are the kinds of things that I look for, and I'll stop.
Don't ever feel like giving us book recommendations means that you have to stop at some point, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're here to get books. It's like if we encourage somebody to pick up one of the books that was mentioned, this is a very successful panel. So
one other story.
Go ahead.
Queer, like queer love.
Yes.
So the queer love in The Stars and the Blackness Between Them.
Yes.
The Hurricane Child by Kaysen Callender. And like there's a lot of like queer relationships and polyamorous relationships, which I think we need to see more of in all of our books. In Sister Mine by Nalo Hopkinson as well. Yeah. So, okay.
Okay. So before I ask one of my pre-planned questions, there was a question for someone who isn't used to reading science fiction fantasy. What books would be a good place to start? So basically, Sherri and Njeri, act like you're trying to convince me to dive into sci-fi. Like, what would you tell me to read? This is for everybody. Wow.
Good question. What's the second one in that stack, Neeks?
Wings of Ebony. It's super amazing. It came out like last 2 weeks.
So wait, go ahead and just
hold it up again.
Yeah, hold up each one, because you just held up the stack like here.
I was hoping someone would be like, what can I get into? These are all fantasy, by the way. I have some sci-fi on the shelf, but Wings of Ebony by Jael is amazing. I love Rue, and Rue's an amazing main character. The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson just got an award. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was amazing. It was amazing. The City We Became. This one is a little bit more challenging, but I do recommend it because it's N.K. Jemisin and it's amazingly done. And
also, the audiobook for that is fantastic.
It blows everyone's shit out of the water. I know that's inappropriate, but it does. This does not have Black main characters. It's mainly Indigenous and Mestizo people, but Rebecca Roanhorse is a Black author. Black Sun is an amazing book. There's a scene with some honey that I think everyone should read. And this is my favorite middle grade right now, Amari and the Night Brothers. It is.
I'm reading that right now.
Isn't it amazing?
So good.
It's beautiful. B.B. Alston really. Yes, Ben.
Is that the UK edition?
He probably has the UK. This is the American one. I'll show it.
Man, I love it. Man,
I want it now.
Keep going.
And finally, last but not least, literally the best book of 2020, Legendborn by Tracy Dion. Literally the best book.
I'm very biased, so I kind of agree. Like, I tell all of my friends, like, can you read it so we can talk about it? I just want to know your response to like 3 scenes and we're good. I just need you to read it so I can get your response and then I'm good. But like, read it. Also, the audiobook for that one is also really good.
I have heard that.
The person, I forgot her name, I wrote it down, but the person that did the narration for that audiobook, she sounds like she's a 16-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. It is a very believable audiobook, in my opinion.
Oh, one more book. Sorry, I don't have it here, but The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna is also very amazing. Oh yes, Ben K. Ready.
Y'all keep ready with the books. I'm not in my library, so this is great. So there are some other recommendations in the chat. Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor. As a person, like I said, I'm the person that does the surface level. This one you could get through. There are some moments where I had to read it again because I got a little confused, but that's just because when you're like diving into the genre, you're not used to it. It's a little weird, but like it makes sense. Try it. Was there more? Oh, I mean, shout out to LaSalle. Congratulations on your second book deal. Like, I know this is like irrelevant, but like we saw the post. Congratulations. I can't wait to read it. It sounds really creepy. Let's see. What are some more before I ask my next question?
Sherri was going to answer the question.
Oh, sorry, Sherri.
No problem. It was fine if we moved on. I was going to ask for clarification, right? Because I am, to be able to recommend the book to someone, I'm like, oh, what, you, Brittany, I feel like you are like surface level, right? There's something about sci-fi that where you get to a certain point, it kind of like trips you up.
Yes.
And so I would need to know more about that to be able to accurately recommend you a book. And then is the question though that was posed from the chat, I was going to ask, is it just that you have never ventured into sci-fi, so you're open, or is there something about it that you're like, it gives me pause?
So let's take it from 2 different perspectives. Give me a book to start with if I've never, ever dived into sci-fi and you think it's a good space for me to start. This is like my first experience into Black sci-fi. What book would you guys recommend me to read? She's going to the library.
And Njeri's collection is just like, I'm so jealous. Like, this is
it's the fact that she can like turn around and just pick the book off the shelf that always shocks me. But
yeah, Chloe, it doesn't seem like the organization would make sense to anyone but her, by the way.
I see everybody's going to their shelves, but I saw Chloe already had a book. So what's the book, Chloe?
Yeah.
You don't have one? I just saw you gathering. I saw y'all gathering books. This is great.
I would start. So my recommendation for now, off the top of the dome, I'm sure there's others that I would be able to think of after a little bit more thought, but I actually would recommend starting with the Benti trilogy.
Yes.
One, they're a set of 4 little novellas, so it's not like it doesn't feel threatening, right? This is all 4 of them bound up. It's like,
yeah, it's a very short read,
so it doesn't feel threatening to a newcomer. The The world building is done very well and illustrative, that you can easily imagine like what's going on. The words, like if you aren't used to reading African futurism, there are going to be words that you're unfamiliar with, but you can, especially written by Njeri, you can just keep going. Like you don't need to go elsewhere to figure out what's happening in the story, right?
Right.
You'll get what it is if you have like basic context clues abilities. And the like science fiction magic system is accessible. Like it's based in math, but you don't need to know any of the math, right?
Right.
You like it's very accessible. So that's my rec.
Okay. See, everybody's back to their everybody has come back from their shelves. Ben, do you have one you want to recommend?
Sorry, I was still muted. I was gonna second. I was gonna second the Binti recommendation. I think for me, just genuinely, this is coming from a little bit of nostalgia, but I've always felt that whenever I've read Nnedi Okorafor's works, it's just always been at the right time. Like for me, I just started BookTube, and then people started actually talking to me, and then they were like, "Oh, what shall we read together?" And then someone suggested Binti, and then it was just it's just nostalgia for me, because like it was just always a good time. And like Binti again is just like Sherri said, it's very, very accessible. One of the things that I was worried about, which Sherri actually touched upon, was the math. I was just like, oh no, they're talking about math. And for me, I'm an English lit student through and through. Math is nowhere near for me. So I thought it was going to get into the nitty gritty, but it never did. So it's always very accessible. So I would second the Binti recommendation. In terms of other like really accessible at the beginning, I've actually found that I've gone a complete freeze and I can't think of anything on the spot. But get back to me, and I will have
We'll circle back next. Yeah. I'm going across the line. So Chloe, do you have any books you want to recommend?
Is this still sci-fi only, or is this fantasy?
We can do fantasy too. Like we can do sci-fi and fantasy together.
Okay.
Well, I know I know that like Njeri's gonna have to go back to her shelf, but like for everyone else, like we can do regular.
Okay. I also just want to say that I live for Chloe's recommendation. So
I was gonna say that after she recommended
you. So for sci-fi and Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon, like I think that if for sci-fi, if people think there's going to be like a lot of technical stuff and that might throw them, but I think this is like a nice blend of having like futuristic technology and also like feeling like pretty easy to understand in terms of how it talks about it. And also it has a character that I just adore, like Aster, the main character. Like I was so protective of her. I loved her so much. And I think it's very hard to read this book and not fall in love with her and just want to see her safely to the end of the story. So that's one rack.
I love books like that where I like want the character. If you make me feel like I need to skip to the end of the book to see if the character lives, you've done a good job. I don't skip, but like I get real antsy.
I'm a skipper. I would like to skip.
I was going to ask you skipping around.
Magnifique Noir by Brianna Lawrence. This is the second volume. If you love magical girl anime, like what are you doing? Like get this series ASAP. This is like such a love letter to nerds. There's a character, Bree, who's a gamer and she's really into anime and she's just always dropping references to like My Hero Academia or Full Metal Alchemist or what have you. So there's that. And I think that even if you're like not into it, you're still gonna like understand the story. And it's just so full of love and it's so fun and
artwork is fantastic.
It is. Let me flip through. Well, I guess that's
the title is Magnifique Noir.
Yes.
Chloe is holding up part 2. There is a part 1. It is available on Amazon, but I bought it from her Etsy shop.
Yeah, you can get it on Kindle Unlimited because I know
it's available there too.
Real version's a little pricey, but like, look at the artwork. This is one of my favorite characters.
This is why
Fire powers, and I I think that this is a send up to Full Metal Alchemist. She looks like Roy Mustang here
She
to me.
does.
So that is what is in store for you if you pick up the series.
Highly recommend. Like we've also added graphic novels into this. Okay. Okay. I think your list is shorter, Neeks, so I'm gonna go with you, and then we're gonna let Njeri go ahead and give us the whole list before we move on to the next question.
Actually, I picked a book that Njeri already said, so
Okay.
really easy to get into. A Phoenix First Must Burn.
Yes, the anthologies are good too.
Yes, I think this is if you're kind of scared about like that technical aspect popping up too hard, this is a perfect way for you to be like, okay, let me just dip my toes in. A little bit more challenging. The 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. All of my recommendations are N.K. Jemisin. I'm sorry, but
We're not.
Yeah, don't apologize.
We're
Never.
not sorry. There's a reason that N.K. Jemisin comes up a lot in this conversation, so we're
NK
good.
all day.
yeah, I think that it's just a great way if you like something that is well paced and beautifully explained, then it's N.K. Jemisin all day, as stated. And then like between that, I really enjoyed Rosewater by Tade Thompson. I don't necessarily consider it an easy read, but I do consider it a great read. So if you just want a great sci-fi, that's the way to go.
Okay. And Njeri?
So I'll go get it. There's another one I want to tell you about. Okay, so if you want to like, I'll just say, so this is Dark Matter. This is like a classic collection. It's edited by Sherri Renee Thomas, and it is the like first collection of speculative fiction from the African diaspora. It's known at least for being like the first or one of the first. There's Dark Matter 1 and Dark Matter 2. But the cool thing about Dark Matter 1 is that it has the short story The Comet, written by W.E.B. Du Bois, who knew, in 1920, right? So this collection, 1920, Black science fiction, it's about something that happens after a comet mashes things up, right? So like,
That to my
if you're interested in like collections, and you get two things, you get a really great collection of writing, but you also get like some like writers who you might not want to buy a whole book about, but you might want like, you know, a lot.
You want to dip your toe, as Neeks said.
Yeah, you want a little nibble, right? So there's Charles Saunders. I'm talking about OG science fiction writers. So Samuel R. Delany, Octavia E. Butler, Charles R. Saunders, Jewel Gomez, for those like people who need the lesbian vampire feels, Nisi Shawls, Stephen Barnes, Tananarive Due, Ishmael Reed.
I'm getting this book.
So like it has a really Walter Mosley, right? So and there's essays, there's short stories. So this is an excellent collection if you're just getting into it and you want to get a feel of different styles to see what you might like. If you want a collection that is African writers only and you're interested in African science fiction, this is volume 1 of Afro SF, Science Fiction by African Writers, edited by Ivan Hartman. There's a short story by Nnedi Okorafor in here, but there are a lot of, at the time, emerging African science fiction writers who are now more well-known, because I think this came out in the 90s, I want to say, maybe later, I'm not sure. But there are 2 volumes of this one. I think a third is on its way. So all African science fiction. And then I mentioned this earlier. This is The Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden.
I'm now a Nikki Drayden fan.
Yes, this is the first Nikki Drayden book that I read, and we read it in Solar Powered, and I really, really enjoyed it. So there's like some shape-shifting activity, there's politics, there's a pop star, so it's like a story where things happen to people and they develop powers, and it's really, 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 really cool. So that's and even if can you see the look on the face of the little girl? Like,
I'm satisfied. I saw the cover of this book and I was like,
expression.
she looks terribly creepy. I love it.
Right. So there's that. I'm just putting this up because WOC Reader, I think that's your name. You mentioned Orleans. Hold on. They sold me a library edition, The Crooks, but this is Orleans.
By Sherri Smith.
By Sherri Smith.
Hey, Sherri, you write books?
I mean, okay, just people who share my name are awesome. That's all.
I haven't read it yet, but I have now 2 copies of it. But there's that. Now for Samuel Delany, this is the Ballad of Beta 2, which I read this year, and it's pretty short, but I find Samuel R. Delany's writing really technical in places, so it took me a minute to read it, but I enjoyed it. So if you want to read vintage sci-fi, Samuel R. Delany is the way to go, and I would suggest that you start with some of the like standalone novellas or novels. So this would be one of them. And then this is an indie trilogy. It's called the Conscious Dreamer series. I've read the first one, The Heaviness of Knowing. So black female protagonist. It's science fiction. Parts of it take place in another dimension. And there's like IT stuff. Like there's techie stuff in it. And so I think there's an emerging romance at some point. I mean, there's definitely a loveless relationship at the beginning, but there's a development that's supposed to happen in books 2 and 3. So those are like a few things.
Can you repeat the author for that last series?
I didn't even say it. Sorry, Sherilyn G. Brown. But I do want to mention like a gap in my reading. This year I'm trying to focus more on Caribbean writers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have some books by Caribbean writers. I need to get more, but I haven't read as many as I would have liked to. So as far as like a recommendation goes, it would be difficult to do that because I haven't like read them.
Right.
But some folks that I'm there's the land of Love and Drowning by Tiffany Unique that I'm going to be reading this year with some friends.
Mm-hmm.
There's also Tobias Buckle, Tobis Buckel, Buckel, and of course Dr. Karen Lord, who wrote The Best of All Possible Worlds, The Galaxy Game, Redemption in Indigo, and Unraveling. And those like Dr. Karen Lord is amazing. I think she's living and writing from Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you should check Rebel Women's Lit for recommendations for Caribbean writers. Yeah.
Thank you. I forgot them. Okay, so we gave you guys a bunch of books. Highly recommend you come back and view this again to get more books. I will try to include the list because I've been writing them down as we've been talking. So I will try to include the list. But let's just say we got everybody hooked on African sci-fi or Afro sci-fi and fantasy. They want to deep dive into this more. Obviously, our panel is getting ready to take an end. So where can they go? We've already mentioned Rebel Women's Lit. That is a perfect place to get Caribbean authors. You can finally get your Caribbean fix. I highly recommend them. Nori, I'll answer your question in a second. We have mentioned solar powered a lot. So I know that Njeri and Chloe are hosts for Solar Powered. So we would like to know more about Solar Powered and why they should come get their fix with you guys.
Do you want to go, Chloe? I've talked a lot. So Solar Powered is a book club where we read Afrofuturism, African futurism, Black science fiction, and fantasy. It's on Facebook. And we have book clubs. We had one today where we talked about The Broken Kingdoms, book 2 of the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. The third member of our co-host leadership team is Isis. And Isis owns Sister Sci-Fi, which is where Sherri and I got our awesome.
Which I'm still sad that I missed that sweatshirt, by the way. I'm still salty.
Also, we did not plan this.
No, we didn't.
I'm so salty I did not get one. I'm so salty.
I got this as a gift. I was thrilled.
And so that's a really good place to go online and to find out more about what books, because she has books written by mostly Black female authors in the science fiction, fantasy, speculative genre. And she's also trying to get more indies. So like, in addition to following this list, you can just go and peruse the electronic shelves at Sister Sci-Fi. And also, and I want to ask Chloe to say this, but there are lots of online magazines that you can check out, like Fire Lit Mag, so Fire FIYAH, because that's where you can get a lot of wonderful short stories. I put one short story called Your Rover is Here, by LP Kindred, who's actually in the chats today. And his story was read by LeVar Burton on LeVar Burton's podcast. And so LP is amazing. So definitely remember that there's a lot of like magazines like Uncanny and a bunch of other ones that are specific for people of color that promote that writing for people who are still getting ready to write their books, but are writing more short stories. But Chloe knows more about that stuff than I do.
I think also like Omenana magazine, OMENANA, publishes a lot of Black authors. I think it's exclusively Black authors writing sci-fi and fantasy. And I think their focus is more on people like from the continent or like one generation out. What else? Midnight and Indigo is a magazine that did a special issue recently for that, for Black women writing spec fic. There's Black Girls Create, which is sort of like a fandom site and a reviewing site, also recently did an anthology that has like short stories and also some poetry, which is like new to me. I didn't know that there's a lot of people writing like speculative fiction poetry. So that's definitely something to look into. I have a short story list from the Black SFF-a-thon, a readathon I hosted to like promote and celebrate Black authors writing science fiction and fantasy, and that's like a little bit more extensive. I do list like the magazines where they're from there. It's like also if you can read online for free, so I can throw that in the. Well, I don't know if I can comment on this video, but I can put it in the private chat. And
let's say we'll add it to the description box under your name as well. But when do you do your Afro SFF readathon?
That is in October. We haven't picked a hard date yet, but it's like 2 weeks in October. We're looking towards the beginning of the month this time around.
Okay. Another readathon for October to put in my head. Bet. You didn't talk about, for those of you who didn't realize it, Octavia Butler is a huge, huge part of this realm that we live in. If you've never read one, you're wondering how to get into it and have a place to talk about it. There is actually a slow read going on, and it has been going on
since
for a couple months now. So again, Njeri has blessed us with this creation as well. So I'm going to let her talk again. Yeah, I'm just giving you all the resources so you have places to go and stay in this world.
And so there's so the co-leads for the Octavia E. Butler slow read are Isis from Sister Sci-Fi, our own Tatiana from Musical Tati, and myself. And we're reading all of Octavia E. Butler's works in near publication order. And many of the people who are here in the chat have been a part of it. So we're in the middle of the Patternist series. We're now going to be reading Clay's Arc. But we started with Kindred, and then we did, I'm going to forget, Kindred and Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, and now we're at Clay's Arc. It's going to go all the way to 2022. We read a book every 2 months, and on my channel, I host slow read, like read-alongs, where we read and then we talk, and then we read and then we talk. And so we read the books together, which is a great experience if you want to read slowly with others. So that's the Octavia E. Butler slow read. And then every 2 months, we have a live show, sometimes with guests where we break up into groups and talk about the books together. So if you want to be part of like a community that's doing this work for 2 years to read like everything all together, maybe have a certificate at the end or maybe a passport, I don't know. But that's definitely something that we're doing. So you can join us if you want to slow read together. Thank you for the shout outs.
I wanted to make sure that the audience knew, like, there are places where you can go where it's groups of us ready to have conversations about these books all the time. So did we miss anything else? Do we have any more readathons or Neeks? Okay, what's yours?
It's not mine, but I do want to point out the Melanin Library. If you guys don't, they're fantastic. Chelsea has her own publishing company as well called Written in Melanin, and Chelsea and LaCase are really, really like, I don't understand. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but they are doing the work and they are very passionate about the work. They have a live show that they do on their channel on YouTube. I think it's just called Melanin Library on YouTube. And it's really great. Same thing, you know, they love talking about books written by Black people. They do primarily talk about Black women and Black femmes. So if you love books by Black women and Black femmes, please go forth and join their lives.
Okay. Oh, yes. To answer this question, if you guys have any quick follow-up questions, go ahead and post them. The Facebook group is the Facebook group for the solar powered. What is your Facebook group called?
Solar powered, SOULAR, solar powered. And we can put it in the.
If you go to the description box under Njeri's name, you should see a link to a direct link to the Facebook page if you would like to join in. We tried to put as many links as possible. We're gonna have to go update it though, because we've also mentioned a lot more here that we didn't talk about. Melanin Library YouTube channel is called Written in Melanin, by the way. Let's see. Oh, and then we have the Black Futures Club.
Yes.
Okay, so the Black Futures Club is also another group, and that is with the Broken Spine and Luxurious Blue, and they are going to be talking about the unkindness of ghosts. So I think we've given you guys like a million different ways to engage and to get your life. So I guess do you guys have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers or anything? Because, man, we gave a lot.
I honestly just read Legendborn, please. It's literally, I can't stress this enough. I think it's a perfect book. I legitimately think it's a perfect book. From pacing, wordcraft, sentence structure, characterization, the way that it ended, the way that it's set up for the next one. I think it's a perfect book. Please read it.
Okay, anybody else with some last words?
I was just going to say, Chloe touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I think one thing that's really, really cool as well is just checking the online magazines and the publications. I think for me, there have been periods of time last year and even periods of time this year where I just have not been like, I haven't had the energy or the drive to read a full book, but there are short stories and there are like some shorter materials. So if you are not in the space to actually like read a full book, check out some of the online publications as well, and you'll find that there's something for you. Like there really is something for you out there. Like you've been given so many different resources, but if you're feeling for something shorter and something sweeter, do check out online publications like the ones listed, and you'll have a great time. Like genuinely, I was reading a short story earlier today because just like, I don't know, I just was in a bit of a brain fuzz. But again, it's still like short stories are amazing. So yeah, check out some short publications, smaller publications. Yep. Anthologies are a great way, and novellas are a great way to get rid of a reading slump. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. And Njeri, what do you want to say?
3 short things. There's a Black science fiction and fantasy community out there. So if you want to like develop relationships with people who are reading because it's meaningful to us, then find us, because we're out there and we like making friends. On that point, Black people are in the future, which is why I read books with Black people in the future. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is I just want to thank Black Prose Book Club for the Black Book Summit, because over the past 4 weeks, you guys have created a space for Black folks to come together and to talk together here, like as guests, but the chats have been live. Beyond the chats have been live as well. And Black women and femmes do so much emotional labor to create community. And I don't think that we take enough time to stop and recognize that, because there's so much work you did behind the scenes that you'll continue to do behind the scenes. You did it without pay, and you did it for our community. And I just want to say thank you very much, because this is the last panel for the Black Book Summit. Thank you as a panelist and as a member of the community for creating this space. The time and energy has not gone without notice. So thank you.
It's like I'm gonna let Njeri take, or I'm gonna let Oakley take all that credit, because woo, y'all know I get uncomfortable with thanks. All right. First of all, thank you guys. Like, y'all helped us make the Black Book Summit a thing. Like, you need panelists to do this. I also want to specifically thank y'all, because y'all not only came here to talk about fantasy, but y'all came with books to show multiple times with lists and suggestions and groups. And I really hope that this just gave a highlight to the fact that, like, our books create community, and that our books have a space because we created the space for them to exist. And it's not someone else's job to make our books relevant. Like, we make our books relevant by how much we love them and how much we want to talk about them and how much we even beg people to read the books over and over again. Like, how many times, for God's sakes, I beg people to read books, and it's always just so nice to come and talk to all of you guys. So I would like to give you guys first, thank you so much. This officially ends the first Black Book Summit of 2021. We will be coming back next year with another Black Book Summit. Obviously, we're going to have other topics and other things to introduce you guys to, as we're going to try to not repeat ourselves as we continue to do this. We hope on expanding. Some announcements specifically for Black Prose. If you have been keeping up, we actually are reading Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden, and we will be discussing that tomorrow. And we have lots and lots of thoughts. So please come join us. It should be fun. With that being said, we're going to go back to our regular scheduled programming. Throwback-a-thon is coming up. For those who don't know, this is the random readathon we created 3 years ago. And we're excited. The graphics are lit because I pat myself on the back because I did that. I think that's all of the things. I just want you guys to stay blessed. Now it's time for the after panel nap, and we will see you guys later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.